Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambermont Weber, and today we have breaking news coming to us um, from Berkeley, California, with independent scientist Leuren Moret. Welcome, Leuren.
Thank you, Alfred. I think we have some very, very interesting news to present today to the public, and I think they should certainly know what is really going on behind the scenes in Syria.
Well, this is really extraordinary. Just to get to the bare bones headlines, Ukrainian WikiLeaks has published a transcript that reveals that U.S. Senator John McCain and Saakashvili, the Georgian, are
Governor of Odessa Oblast.
right, and they are uh, they are involved in a serious plot, a conspiracy to create the shooting down of an American plane in Syria to blame Russia, and also the shooting down of a Russian plane to blame America, thereby creating an international incident intended to spark World War III. And I can tell you that if these facts in the transcript are borne out by the evidence, U.S. Senator John McCain is committing treason under Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution. So this is a transcript that was released on August 28th, translated from the Russian by Christina Rus. And could you tell us more about it? And
It wasn't August 28th.
excuse me, this is October 28th.
October 28th,
Yeah,
2015.
2015.
Yes.
And sorry, I misspoke there. It's October 28th, 2015.
Yesterday, yes.
Yes. Could you bring us into the picture here and tell us more about it? I'll just read from the transcript. McCain
Excellent.
confirmed, quote, McCain confirmed the plan. Everything is in place, so you know. We got cover from the U.S. Senate. In Syria, Russians must be hit, or else if Russians and Americans fundamentally agree, they will really dump Ukraine. Donbass is on conservation. Project Transnistria is suspended. If it goes on, we are done. We should speed things up in Syria. Have you prepared our guys? And this transcript, which we'll publish in an article to accompany this interview, is very, very explicit. This is an international conspiracy to commit a false flag that would spark World War III and is an international war crime under the UN Charter, under the International Criminal Code. It's a violation of the U.S. Constitution. I'm sure it's a violation of Russian law. So bring us into the picture, Leuren.
Yes, there is a large context to this and very deep roots to the geopolitical situation in the Middle East and also Eastern Europe and Europe today. This involves Governor Saakashvili, a Georgian and former president of Georgia. There is an arrest warrant out for him for war crimes in Georgia, and he's very, very involved with Georgian mercenaries. 40% of the mercenaries that the U.S. and Britain have in Syria now, fighting as the ISIL, ISIS, and IS, and then other smaller groups like al-Nusra, and the Syrian, the National Syrian Front Army or something like that. Anyway, there are maybe 10 or 15 smaller groups, but basically most of them are mercenaries. And they are from 100 different countries. So this is entangling 100 different countries and governments in what's going on in Syria. This is a huge global issue. It's not just a little bombing campaign that Russia's carrying out in Syria. This is an international event. And that's what makes it much more egregious that McCain and Saakashvili and the CIA and these countries in the Caucasus, Chechens, they're Chechens and Georgians fighting there, and it's all illegal. They shouldn't even be in Syria. They were never invited. And they've been bombing and destroying Syria for 4.5 years. They're illegally there. So who's supporting them? European countries, the 100 countries that have allowed or have mercenaries there, whether they wanted them there or not, they're now involved, the governments are. And so this transcript is of a meeting between Governor Saakashvili at the Odessa airport and a Georgian mercenary who's one of the commanders or leaders of a group of anti-aircraft professional specialists, military guys, but they're mercenaries, that Saakashvili has set up and paid to go into Syria. The CIA will meet them in Turkey at Antalya, where the plane is landing that flies them from the Ukraine to Antalya. And then someone will meet them there and take them into Turkey. The minister of the Ukrainian interior, the intelligence unit of the Ukrainian government, has already, his name is Akhmatov, he has already arranged and sent off the anti-aircraft heavy guns and equipment that are needed to shoot first they're going to shoot a U.S. plane, fighter jet down in Syria, and then blame it on Russia, and then they're going to shoot down a Russian fighter jet and blame it on the U.S., hoping to get a big disagreement or to get a big fight between the U.S. and Russia, and then that will result in a big battle over the Ukraine, or if they don't do this, Saakashvili said, we know that we'll lose the Ukraine. And when he says we, he means the U.S. and their allies. So the meeting was held in the Odessa airport. Saakashvili was there. A mercenary from Georgia was there. There was also the Georgian Minister of Defense was there. And then Saakashvili called a number of people and talked to them on the phone, and so it was quite an interesting meeting. And Saakashvili even mentioned that he had turned on the anti-spy transmissions or equipment so that the meeting couldn't be overheard or transcribed or anything. Now, where this came from, we don't know, but I suspect it was the Ukrainian interior police who worked for the intelligence, worked for them, but they were in the big disaster when that trade building in Odessa burned with a lot of activists in it who died. And that was partly engineered by Israel. There were Mossad agents running around in the streets. I saw an interview with one of them. He had a T-shirt on, And all of the Mossad guys had these t-shirts that had chemist on the front of the t-shirt and the back. This one had rubber gloves on. They were making Molotov cocktails in the street, and they're the ones who threw them into that building and caused the deaths of, I think, over 100 people. Now, in the upper floors, the cyber Berkut, or the interior intelligence operatives who monitor computer transmissions, phones, all of that kind of stuff. They can hack into anything. They were upstairs and suddenly realized they were going to be assassinated. And so there were enough of them that they could overcome the attackers, who were also from their own ministry, and they were able to escape from the building, and then they went and found others, and there were snipers all over the place in the Maidan Square and around this trade building in Odessa, and so they finally, the cyber Berkut finally escaped on buses. They went to Kharkov, which was a Russian city. It's in the Ukraine, in the northeast corner above Novorossiya, which is the war zone. And they stayed there for a while, and what they started doing was they went completely against the Ukrainian government and the ministry they'd been working for. And they started covertly hacking and producing documents about who carried out the shoot down of MH17 over the war zone. And they also got a lot of documents about the crooked dealings of the junta, which was the result of a CIA coup. They started showing videos all over Kiev on the billboards in the streets where ads are played as videos, so the drivers driving by can see these ads for different things to buy. Well, they put all these war zone videos showing that it was the citizens, the Russian-speaking citizens, pro-Russia citizens, who were being genocided in this war zone, and this is because the Ukrainian public had been told that Russia was attacking the Ukraine. So I believe it's probably cyber Berkut, because it got too hot for them even in Kharkov, where they thought they would be safe, and they relocated to the Crimea. And of course, that's completely controlled by the Russian Navy. They're protected there. And they, I think, are doing further exposure of documents and things that are undergoing the destruction of the Ukraine. And so I think they probably procured this transcript, and they know the Ukraine, that's their territory, and they handed it off probably to Putin. And he's using all of these incidents that involve Americans and the U.S. and the government and congressmen and everything to expose what is really happening in the Middle East, in Syria, in the Ukraine, even 9/11 and even MH370, the other shoot down, which the MH370 shoot down in March of 2014, when the coup d'etat was happening in the Ukraine, that was the U.S. that shot that plane down. And just outside of, they had taken off from Malaysia, and it was over the South China Sea, which is where the U.S. is involved now with those islands that China is making in the China Sea. And today, the U.S. ship entered the waters that are off limit. I mean, they're not allowed legally to enter the within a certain distance. So they violated that, and they're stirring up China while this blow up is happening in Syria, and the exposure of McCain and Saakashvili planning this false flag to shoot down an American plane and a Russian plane. Now, this is a plan that was conceived by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Lemnitzer was the Chief of Staff of the military. Secretary of Defense is what we would call him. And, he was the head of the Joint Chiefs, all the branches of the military. And they plan to do this in the future in Cuba at that time. And it was shooting down planes and blaming other countries to start disagreements and wars. So it's all being carried out now, and it's very clear now that the shoot down of MH17 over the Ukraine in July of 2014 and the shoot down of MH370 over the South China Sea in March of 2014, just when the coup was happening in the Ukraine, these represent the bookends of Obama's pivot to Asia. And Obama's pivot to Asia is to make sure that we will control the underbelly of Russia and contain Russia. This has always been a plan for 150 years in U.S. foreign policy. And what they don't want is Russia and Germany or Russia and Europe joining forces and economic trade and a one trade zone, because it would be unbalanced, an unbalanced power center. They always want two fairly equal enemies, the Hegelian dialectic, and I'm talking about the Jesuits and these ancient Iranian bloodlines that are running the world and have for the last 5,000 years. So they want two fairly well-matched enemies that they've created, and then they keep them fairly weak so that they can't get out of this harness that they're in and tethered to each other. And this flood of refugees from Syria and the Middle East and other countries that are flooding into Europe is a way to weaken Europe and especially Germany. So this is a very, very complex issue. And right in the beginning of the transcript, when Saakashvili says, if we don't do this, Obama is going to do nothing, and we will lose the Ukraine. So it's really the Ukraine that is motivating this false flag, although the U.S. and Western interests, in other words, NATO, Gladio, the European Union, they want Assad out of office. He's the president, the legitimate president, the democratically elected president of Syria. And he and his father have been very, very, very popular with the Syrian people. I really respect him and his wife. His wife has been very involved and stood by his side and worked very closely, which is unusual for a Middle Eastern woman and head of state. And they've both been very, very active in doing what they could to stand by their people, while the United States and these mercenaries have really destroyed that country for no reason. For no reason. And what the United States has done, because of people like John McCain in the Senate, these Looney Tunes, these mentally ill people. I mean, he's almost senile, or he may be. But they have these harebrained ideas, and they're in positions of power, and they find allies who are infiltrators in our own government institutions, and they start making a lot of trouble in cooperation and collaboration with special interests in other countries. And what we're seeing with this transcript is exactly how they do it. It's how they move the money around. It's where it comes from. It goes through Switzerland and Swiss banks. There are probably 20,000 mercenaries at least involved in this international attempt by the U.S. and Britain, basically, to control the whole world and create a unipolar world. Putin is very opposed to a unipolar world. He said we're all different. It doesn't make a good global economy. And it's a very small crowd who benefit from it at the expense of everyone else. So, now, other things that were brought up in this, Saakashvili talked about how these mercenaries would be moved to, they would fly to Antalya in Turkey. They would be met by a CIA representative. But these are all CIA people with ties to, they're coming out of the Ukraine. And they seem to all know each other very well. And they will be taking this, they will be met, and then the heavy artillery equipment, anti-aircraft equipment, and the munitions for it will be there already. And apparently there are more people involved because they said that they would all meet at Latakia, which is in the north corner, or northeast border, close to the border of Syria. And that is where the air base is that Russia's been using. They're using more than one, but that's a very important one. And Russia and the Allies don't want these ISIL people around there. I think they actually captured the airport even for a while. So, or they threaten it, certainly. Now, what's interesting is that the U.S. and their allies refuse to give these jihadists or mercenaries fighting in Syria, and also they're in Iraq, which is bordering Syria, and they wanted anti-aircraft missiles, but the Allies and the U.S. did not trust them. They said, oh my God, they'll just turn on us and shoot all our planes down. So they refused to give them the shoulder missiles, and they also don't have any planes, but they are hardened and trained and experienced mercenaries. They've been fighting in other wars around the world, and they're certainly capable of shooting planes down if they have the right munitions. So I thought that was very interesting, and what the U.S. did out of desperation now, because they don't know what to do with the Syria situation. The Europeans, the British, the Americans have no idea how to deal with Putin, with Russia in Syria, because now they have at least 5 allies, and the success of these bombing campaigns and the military strategy in Syria has been so successful that over 800,000 Syrians have already started to move back to Syria. Now, Putin gave his speech at the UN, I believe it was September 29th. And then the very next day, the whole world was shocked because Russia started bombing Syria. And they were very strategically, very pinpoint targeting the supplies, the ammunition depots, the munitions depots, the vehicles, the trucks, the tanks, the armored personnel carriers that this Islamic State had all over Syria. I think they had occupied like half of the country. And they were being supported by Israel. Israel was flying into Syria without permission from the Syrian government, without it being invited by them, and dropping supplies to different groups, especially al-Nusra. And the U.S. was flying in and dropping supplies to them, and that's how they were able to sustain this this destruction of Syria over a 4.5-year period. And the Syrian army, the government army, had resisted them as much as they could, but they were exhausted after 4.5 years. And they just kept losing more and more land. It's a land grab, too. And Turkey's involved. Turkey made a deal with the U.S. early on in this 4.5-year war, and Turkey wanted a no-fly zone into Syria where they could come in and bomb all the Kurds, the Kurdish population in Syria, because they had connections to the Kurdish population in Turkey. And so the U.S. agreed to get a no-fly zone in Syria, set it up for the Turks, if the Turks would support the U.S. and their allies, and if and the condition that the U.S. insisted on was that Erdogan, the president of Turkey, not bomb the Kurds in Turkey. Now, Erdogan, in the last 30 days since this bombing started and the Russian presence in Syria, Turkey has violated all of its agreements with every country. Everybody's mad at Turkey. And Erdogan has done whatever he wanted to, but everything has failed and backfired. And it's because all of these parties who were really interested in grabbing part of the landmass of Syria and destroying as much as they can, profiting from it in whatever way they can, all of that has backfired, and the highly professional, very well-trained Russian army, all of the new weapon systems they developed and built and manufactured for this particular type of situation. It's a whole new battlefield now. It's a whole new military strategy and approach and execution. And Putin and Russia have just performed magnificently. Now, I do want to talk about the Iranians. They have come in as allies to support Syria and the U.S. They have very well-trained military officers and military personnel. They are doing flights, and they were assigned or chose a certain part of Syria. Russia took all of the ISIS area that is occupied by ISIS, and then Hezbollah was put along the border of Israel and Lebanon. They have a very large presence there. They've done a very good job supporting the other allies, and they have been boots on the ground. They don't, this is the first time they've even had tanks to work with. And you have to remember, these people are ancient cultures that go back 40,000, 80,000 years. This is where these people are the original equestrian warriors. They are the nomadic equestrian warriors from 40,000 years ago that all of the warfare methods of warfare have come from them. And so they have a corporate history of wars and war strategy before all these big toys came on the battlefield, which have come maybe in the last 100 years or 200 years, 150 years. And believe it or not, Saddam Hussein won the Iraq-Iran War using Mesopotamian warfare strategy. And a CIA agent who was the specialist for the Iraq-Iran War told me to my face that the CIA never expected the Persians to lose, the Iranians to lose. And it was Saddam Hussein who used ancient Mesopotamian warfare who defeated them. And so it wasn't the big war toys that won that war at all. It was strategy, and it was ancient strategy, and it still works. Putin has actually pointed that out. He said, he's talked about it. He said, people don't understand how large and how complex Russia is. Americans especially, I think it's the biggest shortcoming of the Pentagon and the U.S. government administrations is that they don't know the ancient history, and they don't even care, and they're not interested in learning it, and they don't consider it relevant. Well, it sure is relevant, and especially since I've been doing all this research on the ancient history of all the things that are happening today. And it's just happened over and over again, and it's all been perpetrated by the same people. It's just new generations doing the same things, and it's for land grabs, it's for control of resources, it's to grab mineral resources, and it's to control populations. So this meeting was this McCain meeting or his sanctioning along with the California senators, that would be Senator Dianne Feinstein and Senator Boxer. Now, Senator Dianne Feinstein is chair of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, and Barbara Boxer is in the House, and she is the largest recipient of AIPAC election campaign money of any member of Congress.
Senate.
Yeah, she's in the Senate.
She's in the Senate.
Also.
That's right. They both are. Yes, that's correct. So, do you want to add anything, Alfred?
Well, I'd like to just go through a couple of passages here in the transcript and ask you some questions around that. Here we have, they get very, very specific about the type of weapons that are being made available for this false flag. It says, quote, Avakov, Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, transported everything. There are 5 anti-aircraft PZRK. That's the Russian name. They're Willows and Needle. Those are the Russian names. Full ammunition and equipment, large anti-aircraft guns around the road. As soon as they pass the border, your chieftain will meet them. And it says the goal is to shoot down the American plane. They will get flight information. There's a local Kurd there for that. The American plane will be shot down by the Russian military. This will be told that the target was shot down by the PZRK. That's the Russian weapon. After this, the group will go to Hasaka. It is a city near the Kurds, and there they will destroy a Kurdish village with Russians doing everything. The Kurds will shoot down a Russian plane with stingers. The goal is to pit the Americans and the Russians in Syria. McCain is waiting for our actions, and then at the end of the transcript it says, "Good. As soon as you send the guys, let me know. I have to inform," quote, "I have to inform McCain he is waiting." So it's clear from this transcript that McCain is intimately involved in the planning and in the details, and in the input in this false flag operation, which is illegal under international law and treason under the U.S. Constitution. So I want to ask a couple of questions. Number one, how do we know that this transcript is not a plant, and that it was, just a forgery for the occasion, or where McCain's name is sort of used without his knowledge, and McCain has no connection to this group? Could you go through those various arguments?
Well, first of all, there have been many, many mainstream stories, and with photos, very wide publication and promotion of images and articles, news articles of McCain in the mainstream Western news. And over at least the last 5 years, he's been visibly meeting with terrorists all over the Middle East, all over the Ukraine, wherever these operatives are, and they're supported. They can't exist without an intelligence agency handling them and paying them and feeding them with goals and strategies and so forth and so on. And they're just a mercenary army that they work for anyone. So I mean, they're not that different from Blackwater or whatever it's called now. And the Queen of England has her own private army. It's under the British military, but it's the SAS forces. They do exactly the same thing. But they're in British uniform. But she commands them. They are not under British military command. They're under the Queen's command. And so these kinds of things have been happening for a long time. But what is Senator McCain doing all over the world over an extended period of time, over and over again, meeting with known terrorist groups? And they're hugging him, he's smiling with them, he's making sure it gets in the news and lots of coverage and publicity. So who is he really representing? It's not the American people. He's representing special interests. And when Putin started the bombing campaign and cleaning out the mercenaries in Syria, he did it because he had to do it, and there was no one else who was going to do it. And if he hadn't done that, these mercenaries, funded and controlled by the U.S. and the British, the Anglo-American Permanent War Crimes Racketeering Syndicate, were headed for many other countries. And this disaster would have spilled all over the world to many, many, many or most countries until these special interests, the London financiers and these ancient Iranian bloodlines at the top, had control of the entire planet and all the resources. So there was, Russia had to do it, or they would have died. They would have been a casualty in the consequences of not acting in the way that Russia has. Now, McCain, he's really a very strange person. And he's from a family of admirals. He had a very questionable and unimpressive performance as a military officer in Vietnam. A lot of planes were lost on aircraft carriers that he was serving on because of him, and there were pilots in those aircraft that died also. He ended up in the Senate, and he's very, very right-wing Republican, so he's the rah-rah military cheerleader in the Senate, and he's very, very vocal. And as the war against terrorism in Syria progressed over the last 30 days, the U.S. and their allies said they were participating, but they'd already spent 5 years in a campaign to stamp out this jihadi Islamic state, and done nothing. They accomplished nothing. Well, it turns out that in a corner of Syria on the border with Jordan, there's a very strange secret there. There's indications there was very, very heavy bombing. It's an empty zone of desert. There's nothing there to bomb. And yet there had been thousands and thousands of bombs dropped there. Well, it's where the U.S. pilots and Allied pilots were going and dropping the munitions without doing any damage to the Islamic State in Syria that they supposedly were fighting. Now, Putin and his foreign minister Lavrov invited the U.S. and the Allies to join this war, this campaign, to stamp out this illegal organized or semi-organized group of thugs, and hiding behind flags and Islamic jihadi propaganda and so forth and so on. They're just thugs. They're thieves and murderers. They kidnapped thousands of Yazidi people. These are ancient Iranian tribes that live up in the mountains in Iraq, and I think they may be in Syria too. But ISIS and ISIL kidnapped over 5,000 of them, especially the young women, because they're very beautiful. And they were selling them, raping them, and also selling them in slave markets in Syria. They take them into Syria. So they were destroying that whole culture and that tribe, and just to profit. They're just hooligans and thugs. And then the Kurds are there too. They're also ancient Iranian bloodlines who live in the mountains in Turkey. I've been with them up in the mountains. I stayed overnight with them. I was on a botanical expedition. They were lovely people, very generous, very kind, and very, very strong and very smart. And they are trying to survive. They've been bombed and assassinated and genocided for centuries. So this is a very, very tricky area with many different factions, different religions. Syria is mixed. There are many Christians, Eastern Orthodox Christians, from the time of the Crusades. And even before that, from the time of the schism in the Vatican, when the Eastern Orthodox refused to submit to the Pope in Rome, and so King Constantine took them to Constantinople, which is we call it Istanbul today. And they made their headquarters there. There are many different Christian groups in Syria now. There are many Iranian tribes in villages. They've been there for thousands of years. And when Putin started the bombing campaign, the president of Iran gave him a list, President Assad and Putin a list of the villages that should be evacuated before the bombing campaign started. So he was having the Iranian tribal people removed from danger. President Assad himself has he has blue eyes, and he's a member of the Awati religious group. It's a sect of Islamic people, but they believe in mysticism and Gnosticism, and they have elements of mystical beliefs and so forth that all have their roots in Zoroastrianism, the ancient Iranian religion, and the movements that came out of that. So 10% of the people in Syria are actually Awati. They're Iranian people with this, they're Islamic, but they have a different kind of a flavor of beliefs with influences from the Persian beliefs. So it's a very, very interesting situation. There's a lot to learn by following it. It's a great way to learn history and geography. It's exciting. And fortunately, this time, it's having a positive outcome. Now, as Putin made progress, and first they destroyed all of the ammunition depots and the weapons depots and the supply chain, now they're moving out to bomb areas. For instance, they just started bombing yesterday the border with Jordan. That's where al-Nusra is, and that's exactly the group that McCain's schemers were planning to collaborate with. So those Russian bombers arrived in the middle of the night. They came from Moscow. They weren't even off of the Russian aircraft carrier in the Syrian port where they are headquartered. These were special bombers that came directly from Russia. And now they're starting to move out into other areas of Russia and their allies. And as this pressure increases, because the number of sorties these fighter jets are doing every day, the Russian and their allies, and the more and more damage they're doing to these mercenaries on the ground, I'll just call them the Islamic State as a basket kind of term, a lot of them have panicked and fled from Syria. Some of them went to Europe to go on welfare as refugees. Others have moved into Afghanistan and further east in that underbelly of Russia, which is very vulnerable. And they're joining ISIS and IS and ISIL, groups that are already fighting and infiltrating into Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. And the Chinese are there in Syria because of the danger of these Islamic fighters, troublemakers, going into Xinjiang, which is the Uyghur tribal area of China. These are Chinese who are Muslim also. And they've always rebelled against China. So it's very, very interesting, and it's happening very fast, but this has put tremendous pressure on the U.S. and on Britain. And Britain is always kind of hiding in the skirts of the U.S., but they're really the primary promoter of all of this. And I knew, and Russia knew, and anyone who's savvy watching this happening knew that sooner or later the U.S. and the West would get desperate. And so I knew some really bad schemes and operators were going to emerge with some very, very dangerous retaliatory plans that they plan to carry out: terrorism in England, terrorism in the U.S., terrorism in Russia. And the jihadis have all said, we're present in all those countries and we're going to blow them up. And it's a retaliation for the success of Russia and their allies in Syria in stomping out the jihadis, or the Islamic State. They're a tremendous threat to the entire world. And they're very well trained, and their own countries don't want them back because they're trained in military weapons and warfare, and they're hardened, battle-trained soldiers who will go and overthrow and destroy a country without even blinking their eyes. They just move on to the next one. It's what they do. It's their livelihood. They're professional about it, and they're for hire. I mean, how did America form? It was a colony of the British, and when the American colonials wanted independence, the British went to Germany and hired the Hessian soldiers from the Prince of Hesse. And they were the ones who came in their red uniforms and marched in units, and they got mowed down by the American colonials, who were guerrillas. They used guerrilla warfare, much as what we see, what just happened in the Ukraine and what's happening in Syria. So the U.S. now is extremely desperate, and as Saakashvili pointed out in the transcript, if we don't do this, if we don't shoot these planes down and pit the U.S. against Russia, hit them both really hard, then we're going to lose the Ukraine. And it's not just the Ukraine. Russia's not going to stop in Syria. They're going to continue to the east, across that underbelly through Central Asia to China. They're going to wipe out all the jihadists there. They have no choice. They have to. And there are probably 200,000 of these jihadis around the world now. It's not a small group, and it's a terrible threat to all countries. And so this is what McCain came up with. He's had harebrained ideas before, but it seems like in the newspapers and the media sources in Eastern Europe, in the Ukraine, in Russia, in the Caucasus, I looked at some of the Caucasus news sites, all of what they're reporting is consistent, and what they have reported over the last 5 years is very consistent with what is in this transcript. There are 40% of the mercenaries in Syria are Georgians, and now the Chechens are involved. And they talked in this transcript, Saakashvili and the mercenary there, who was a Georgian, talked about bringing the Chechens in when they got to Syria. So it's Chechens also. And so the Caucasus region has always had very, very wild tribes there. And even Catherine the Great had to fight a 100 years war. She inherited it when she became the Empress of Russia, but it took 100 years for the Cossacks, or they're basically Kazakhs. In Russian, they're called Cossacks. They fought a war for 100 years in the northern Caucasus before they won it for Russia. So these are tough people, and they like to fight, and they're a little bit crazy, and they're very, very smart, they're clever, and they're all related to each other in some way or other, and so they move around as clans, and they work together in groups as clans. And so I hope that answered your question.
Right. Well, just to highlight one thing is that we can deduce, or it's a reasonable deduction, that the fact that last night Russia came in and sent bombers to bomb precisely in that area where the conspirators were meeting to do the first strike, to have an American plane shot down by an alleged Russian weapon. That serves as functional confirmation of the veracity of this transcript. That is just amazing that this transcript was released on the 28th, and that very night Russia sent special bombers from Moscow to bomb the exact area where the McCain's conspirators were meeting.
That's right. What tighter fit could you get to confirm that transcript is an actual, real document?
Well, now if we look back at the history of the U.S., I mean, we have the USS Maine was sunk in Havana Harbor in the 1890s so as to get the Spanish-American War started, so the U.S. could occupy the Philippines, could occupy Puerto Rico. They tried to occupy Cuba. They weren't able to. You go up to World War II, and Pearl Harbor was a complete false flag.
I have a story about World War II. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that all of these wars were started by false flags. If you go up to Vietnam, the Tonkin Gulf resolution was based on a total fraud there, that U.S. destroyers had been attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. If you move forward to the War on Terror, 9/11 was a false flag that we now know was 30 years in the planning. The U.S. government at the highest level, at the level of the Nixon government, Henry Kissinger as the national security advisor of Nixon, all of the top people, the person who would be the Secretary of Defense on September 11, 2001, Rumsfeld, in 1971 was the operationally in charge of the program. The U.S. had knowledge of 9/11 in 1971 and did their forward planning then. And so it seems like it's standard operating procedure for the U.S. to start all of its wars through false flags, and it looks as though this is one of the false flags that they were using through McCain to attempt to start World War III through a false flag. By the way, it has been recorded that McCain has done treasonous acts prior, because in Vietnam it has been reported that he did cooperate with the North Vietnamese in return for preferential treatment there.
Of course he did.
Yeah.
He's from a long line of privileged people doing the same thing.
Yeah. So
he's a multi-generational war criminal.
Yeah. So here we have not just an isolated instance, but here we have, I would say that John McCain, and I just want to run this by you, it seems to me that John McCain is operating as a cutout for the CIA, the U.S. Defense Department, to create the false flag that will be the spark that starts World War III.
Yes.
And by putting McCain in there, they figure they can just say, they can always say, oh, it's just John McCain. He's just an isolated crazy. But it seems to me that John McCain is operating here as a cutout for the military and intelligence establishment, which includes the White House of the U.S. Do you feel that that's a fair assessment?
Oh, I think you're 100% right, and I'll just confirm it with his actions, with what he did when he started calling for a no-fly zone in Syria. That happened before this false flag plan, and that failed. But what happened is he was not happy. He was very mouthy about it, not at first, but he got feedback from the Republicans, I think, and DOD and so forth, when Putin was negotiating with the U.S. on where the U.S. could fly and their allies in Syria. And basically, Putin set up his own no-fly zone and prevented the U.S. and other countries from flying wherever they wanted to in Syria. They had an agreement. And so there was kind of quiet for a couple days, and then people started mumbling about it, and then all of a sudden McCain became very, very, very mouthy. Well, it seemed like I think that people were quiet. They were waiting to see what Obama would do. Well, Obama did nothing, because he usually does nothing. He's very indecisive. And so then McCain got the phone call and said, okay, get your loudspeaker out and start objecting to this. And so all of a sudden, McCain was turned on, and he was very, very loud and vocal about he didn't like this no-fly agreement, and on and on and on and on. And he said, we're going to have a no-fly zone in Syria, whether they want it or not, and whether Russia wants it or not, or the Syrians. And then what happened? Then it was Ashton Carter, who's the Secretary of Defense, who said, we're going to have a no-fly zone in Syria. And then more people came forward in the government and reiterated that, supported that statement. But then, they're there in Syria illegally. And in order to get a no-fly zone, the U.S. and the allies would have to go to the UN to get them to okay it. And the UN isn't going to okay it when half of the Middle East is now working with Russia as allies, and it's their country, it's their land, it's their region. And the proposal was just harebrained anyway. But what the U.S. wanted it for, and their allies, especially England, was to be able to continue bombing the civilian infrastructure and destroying the country and balkanize it. And then Turkey and all these other countries, surrounding countries, had their eyes on certain land they wanted to grab. They were going to cut it up, and share it like a patchwork quilt or something. And so all of a sudden, this American general, one of the top generals, said he had a press conference, and he said, well, yeah, we're going to do a no-fly zone, but, there are going to be a lot of problems and hurdles, He said, first of all, it's illegal, and we need the UN to okay it, and they're not going to do that. And we're not even in Syria legally. We weren't invited to be there. And then he went on and on and on with all these hurdles they had to overcome. And finally he said, it's going to be really difficult, and we're probably not going to be able to do it. And then there was silence for a few days, and then this harebrained scheme coming out of the Ukraine got exposed, And what it really is about is not losing the Ukraine more than it is about not losing Syria. But with Syria goes the whole Middle East, because now the Saudi Arabians have gone to Putin and asked Russia to help them get rid of this jihadist group. And even though they funded ISIL, ISIS, I guess. They did it. The Saudi Arabians gave them money because they were in Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabis. And they said, okay, here's some money, but you have to go 3 countries away and stay there. We don't want you coming back here. So it was just a way to bribe them to get out of Saudi Arabia. But now they're coming back. So what do the Saudis do? They went to Putin a week ago. They sent a delegation of 20 people, and a lot of them were the royal family, to Moscow to meet with him and ask him to help them. Then Iraq had a debate in their parliament about asking Russia to help them clean out the jihadis out of Iraq. Then what other countries? Then there were like 3 or 4 other countries that came. Oh, Azerbaijan refused to be anti-Russian, and that was a lot of pressure last week from the U.S., probably McCain and that crowd. And so what's happened is all of this has backfired on the U.S. We've actually held countries as economic hostages all over Europe, all over the world, all over the Middle East, and everybody's tired of it. And as soon as people realized in countries' governments that that Putin was serious, that the Russians were capable and effective, they started coming and asking for help from Russia. So the whole Middle East is moving away from the U.S. control and towards and they're joining Russia. Russia has Iran, Hezbollah, Iraq is helping. Some of the Kurds now have joined the Russian effort in Syria. So the whole thing is falling apart for the U.S. And McCain's harebrained false flag scheme is not the last one we're going to see coming out of the U.S. and Britain. We're going to see more and more desperate actions proposed, and they are very, very dangerous. A wounded animal gets more and more dangerous as it's dying. So I think that the evidence is all there.
Right.
And everything has happened. It's all backed up by other countries and at least a 5-year history of the actions of Obama and the U.S. administration. And this multilateral alliance that Russia has put together is amazing. And Putin has already started doing that in Southeast Asia. He's putting out overtures, making friendly contacts, trying to make economic agreements and joint ventures and so forth with the countries of Southeast Asia. And he knows he has to do that in order to completely squeeze the U.S., NATO, Gladio, and of course the hidden British hand out of Eurasia.
Right.
And
now,
that's what the ultimate goal is. And if he doesn't do it, Europe and China and Russia will not survive.
well, this is a strategy that the West has followed, and by the West it really means the bloodline bankers, the City of London and the Wall Street bloodline bankers that have been the ones that targeted Russia, that have been behind the assassinations of the czars going back to the assassination in the 1880s And
And
then
they funded the Bolshevik Revolution. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
yeah, no, that's what I meant. And so it was the bloodline bankers that were behind the so-called false flag political group that assassinated the Russian Tsar who liberated the serfs with land in the 1880s.
That's right.
And it was the bloodline bankers that funded the Bolsheviks that co-opted the Russian Revolution that then assassinated the Tsar's family in 1917. And I'm looking here, and so far, looking at a search of the mainstream media, there does not appear to be any
mention
other than in any mention at all in the mainstream media of this role of John McCain and of this impending false flag operation to have an American plane be shot down by a Russian weapon, and then have an American Stinger shoot down a Russian plane so as to trigger World War III. It seems to me that if you trace that one back, it goes way beyond saving the Ukraine. That's sort of a tactical or one of the strategic objectives, but that goes back to the ultimate designers of the depopulation plans, the ones who are committed to World War III, which has been in the works for 150 to 200 years.
Oh, it's probably planned even long before that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And what we're looking at now is a global transformation at a speed that is unbelievable. It's never, nothing like this has ever transpired so globally and in such a short period of time. And what is happening is that with Putin's very, very strategic and very careful and very purposeful work and strategy and so forth, he is transforming a global economy that is based on cannibalism and parasitism and by destruction and thieving. But you never create wealth by destroying things. And that's what the United States has been involved in since 1776. We've been involved in wars and overthrows and takeovers and genocides and total destruction of the environment in country after country. And it's not sustainable. And finally someone came along with enough military and understanding of deep history and support and courage and smart enough to figure out how to flip this to an economy. Well, that's capitalism, but to an economy that is based on creating things, producing products, sharing wealth, entering into mutually beneficial agreements and treaties. And this new economy that is being introduced by Putin is called the New Silk Road economy. And this already, Egypt is included, the whole Middle East will be included, Europe will be part of it. There are large railroads going in across the Eurasian continent from China through Russia to Europe. And see, the railroad gauges are even different for Russia than what Europe has. So Russian trains can't go into Europe, and European trains can't go into Russia. They have to stop at borders and reload, unload and reload goods in order to carry out trade. Or they have to fly it or put it on ships. And another very important thing is that not only does Russia have the vast, vast oil and gas fields of Siberia and northern Russia, including the Arctic area, it's new now. Russia is building bases around the Arctic. Most of that region of vast oil and gas deposits belongs to Russia. And so there's tremendous wealth in the future, and Russia has to supply Europe with oil and gas. It's the best quality at the lowest price. And why in the world is the America trying to take oil tar sands and shale fracturing, shale oil and stuff, which is very expensive to produce, plus it destroys the environment, and then do all this very heavy processing and then to ship it all the way across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean to customers? It's just, it doesn't pencil out unless oil is at least $80 a barrel. They don't break even. So they can't compete with Russia. And that's what a lot of this desperation is about on the behalf of the Americans. Well, why was the U.S. really interested in Ukraine? Number one, the Jesuits want all that black soil to grow GMO food, which nobody wants in Europe or in Russia. No, they refuse to eat it. And so the Jesuits own Cargill, they own Archer Daniel Midlands, and they own Monsanto. And they want all of the Ukraine, all of that black, rich black soil, which is 35% of the best agricultural soil in the world. And then when the war sort of started coming to a climax in Novorossiya, the eastern part of Ukraine, last summer, and it was in the spring of this year with the Debaltsevo disaster for the Ukrainian army. The militia or the volunteer pro-Russian soldiers went into the battlefield areas that had been occupied by the Ukrainian troops, and they discovered American oil companies were doing fracking, and they were doing exploratory research on looking for oil and gas and defining the fields and the volume that could be removed from the underground sources. And it was Chevron, which is Rockefeller, had contracts to do mineral exploration, and also Royal Dutch Shell. And they were doing exploration in the areas where the Ukrainians were camped, the Ukrainian army troops were camped, and they'd been drilling and doing seismic exploration the whole time the war in Novorossiya had been going on, and the pro-Russian troops didn't even know about it. Now, what's really interesting is that Kolomoisky, who was one of the oligarchs in that area controlling resources, had a bank, and he put Joe Biden's son on the board of directors of the bank that was overseeing the oil exploration. And John Kerry, former Senator John Kerry, he's the Secretary of State. He put the roommate of his stepson on the board of directors of that bank also. And so Kerry and Biden had a personal vested interest, which has to be illegal. That's why they put their relatives on it. And there's all these profits and secret deals and just big loads of money the politicians are making or angling for or negotiating for. They're after money, and that's why they become politicians. It's to make large amounts of money. So there is the Vice President of the United States and the Secretary of State of the United States with oil and gas dollars rolling around in their heads, and they're greedy too. So this has been obviously a land grab, a resource grab, a mineral grab, and it's not the American people who really want to support it. It doesn't represent our values. It doesn't reflect our Constitution, and it's all done secretly in dirty deals, and that's exactly what this Saakashvili-McCain transcript exposes. This is how they do it. And look at the banks that were involved, and look how they were moving the money around in the banks. Would you like to read some of that?
Well, I'm trying to see which part of the I'm familiar with the weapons parts of it.
It was about how much they were going to pay.
Yeah. What I said, quote, what I said, do in time, give each one of the five 10,000, yes. Give 20,000 to this Tarhan's father. I already paid the guy.
To Tbilisi. It was to Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. So that's going to the president or the politicians there. It's a payoff to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it says McCain is waiting for our actions. Now, let me ask you this. We just looked through the U.S. press, both in the news and, on the internet. There's just one source worldwide that's reporting this transcript. There's nothing in the news so that McCain's name as being involved in the planning of a false flag that would result in a false attack upon a U.S. plane and then a false attack upon a Russian plane by a U.S. Stinger in order to start World War III. How do you think that we as private individuals now, and those listening to the program here, how can we get this out and put McCain out on the dock, out on the table, so that everyone sees what he's doing? He's trying to start World War III. I mean, whether he's doing it as a cutout of the Pentagon or the CIA, which he's probably doing, he still has to take accountability for it.
Well,
what can we do? I'm looking at his office here at 218 Russell Senate Office Building, phone number 202-224-2235. I mean, how, here it is in black and white, and who knows how much money he's getting on the side for doing this. What can we do? What can we do? I know that as a war crimes judge, I can tell you that this functionally is a war crime. It is a violation of the UN Charter against aggressive war. It's a violation of the Rome Statute. It's a violation of the International Criminal Court. It's a violation of the U.S. Constitution, Article 3 against treason. It's violation of probably many criminal statutes that would apply to John McCain. It's a violation of Russian law. It's, Interpol could probably pick these guys up. So, including John McCain, and we know how the CIA, namely Barack Obama, is going to protect war criminal John McCain, right? But how can we as citizens make an issue of this so that everybody knows that what they're doing down there in the U.S. is just protecting a war criminal who they had tasked with starting World War III?
Well, this is how.
Yeah.
This is how. First of all, the ordinary people don't have much influence over the laws. It's out of their reach. The war treaties, the politicians in their capitals, their parliaments and Congress. That's out of the reach of most people. So you have to take it home and make it personal. And when Saakashvili said, McCain's waiting for me to call him and notify him that, we've been successful in this false flag in Syria. And basically, as soon as McCain got that phone call, he intended to immediately start pushing for American troops going to Ukraine. And Saakashvili even said that. The boots on the ground. And what are they talking about now in Washington, D.C. and the mainstream media? We're putting boots on the ground in Syria. But what they really mean is they're going to put boots on the ground in the Ukraine. And because it's a Ukraine that they don't really want to lose. They'll put boots on the ground in Syria, but it'll be token, and they're not going to find anyone, and they're not going to be successful because they haven't done it for 5 years. So, leopards don't change their spots. And so what we need to do is to counter-recruit. We need to begin informing our adult children in the military. We need to do outreach to the people we do have influence with and in our local communities. And so go to your city council meetings, write to the local newsletter in your village or your town or your city, sponsor films and or start websites or take stories that expose what's happening with people like McCain, involving us in these wars that are personal benefits for them. They're becoming millionaires and billionaires, and it's killing our children.
Well, here it is. U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, 2 days ago, U.S. to begin direct action on the ground in Iraq and Syria.
Yes, that's right. And so if Americans start screaming about it, and the election is coming up, it's the perfect time to put pressure on the candidates. And we should really all be making a big stink about it, because this is not stopping with Syria. It's not stopping with Syria. Syria is just the first step. It's the first country. And so we also need to support the countries that are going in and cleaning out the jihadis who are just mercenaries, hire a soldier for the Anglo-American Permanent War Crimes Racketeering Syndicate. Lots of people have a lot of free time now because all the factories are gone and all the jobs are gone. So why aren't they out organizing and talking to each other and opposing this? It's
right.
easy. It doesn't cost anything. Everybody go sit on your front lawn.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
people all over America did that, it would stop it.
Right, right. So we can certainly put up some resources on this at newsinsideout.com. If you can put it up at your website, Leuren,
Yes.
Moret.info, we'll put up.
It's already posted. We haven't released it yet. It's already uploaded onto our website.
Yeah, and we can put up who the presidential candidates are.
Yes.
You know that this is what's happening behind
Yes.
the scenes. That John McCain,
Yes.
presumably as a cutout, is out there trying to start World War III.
Yes.
And that we actually have proof now.
That article is posted on our website now. It has been released this morning.
Good.
So people get that article and spread it all over the social media, post it on websites, get it everywhere. We can do it. It's easy. Just sit down at your computer and start put it all over indie media all over the world.
Right.
And let's get Putin to release the evidence that he has on 9/11. We need to support the Russians. We need to support Putin. Do you know who gave the maps with the locations of ISIS in Syria to Russia, to Putin? Jimmy Carter.
I didn't know
Carter
whether
had the maps of all the locations for ISIS in Syria, and he passed them on to the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C., and they went directly to Putin.
I didn't know whether that was a real story or not.
It's a real story because Putin has already thanked him publicly for it.
Uh-huh.
It's a real story. And Jimmy Carter had them at his library. It wasn't classified or anything. But Putin didn't have those maps. And now people are saying, Paul Craig Roberts and other people are saying Jimmy Carter's a hero. There are lots of people now who don't support this. Even Henry Kissinger does not like Brzezinski. This is coming out of Brzezinski, too, and the Rockefellers and the Council on Foreign Relations. So we need to use this ammunition against them.
Correct.
If Putin can squeeze them out of Syria, and he's going to do it out of Eurasia, why can't we do it? We don't need tanks and bombers and fancy fighter jets. We have a media. We need to use it. People should be talking about it at their churches and in their churches. If there are enough people talking about it and want it to change, it's going to change. And just like Putin forced other countries to change, he did it. Look at all the allies now. Countries that were completely pro-American now are anti-American because of Putin, his actions. He didn't talk about it, he just went and did it.
Right.
Well, we could just go and do it.
When you say we could just go and do it, could you spell that out? That's
well, we can just go and distribute this news coverage that is critical for the public to have. We can spread it. Why do we need the mainstream media to spread it when we have the internet?
Right. Exactly.
We are the internet. The media can't even compete with the internet.
Yeah. It's just pointing out that once again how much the mainstream media is a partner and an actor in the global genocide program of the international bankers and bloodline families.
Well, just to encourage people, I'm going to give an example of what I did that was really, really effective, and I never have plans ahead of time. I just go, oh my God, that issue needs to be addressed. And then I just start doing something. It started with writing a letter to an editor in a black community in San Francisco, Hunters Point. And I said, you have buried nuclear waste there from the Navy. Everybody in the community, when they die, the coroner for the county said every single person I have done an autopsy on from that community has had cancer in their body. So I wrote a letter to the editor. It started a whole huge thing in that community. Then I wanted a depleted uranium bill in the state legislatures because it had never gotten not a single bill introduced in Congress in 3 or 4 presidential administrations. So I got like maybe 33 or 35 bills into different state legislatures. And I said, push from the bottom up. If we do enough in states, it'll get into Congress and force it. So I just didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't even get them in the legislatures. I wrote about DU. People read the articles. They were empowering, and they went and did the bills. That's what you want to do. You want to give people the right information, empower them, and give them the self-confidence and the good information to be successful. So then I said, well, I think I'm going to go to Hawaii, and this was this was on the way to Malaysia, on the way back, I'm sorry. So I stopped on the way back from the War Crimes Tribunal in Malaysia. I stopped in Hawaii, and I ended up staying there 3 months. Well, the military had never told anybody in Hawaii that they'd been bombing with depleted uranium and had been shooting munitions with depleted uranium on all the firing and gunnery ranges and all over Hawaii. And it was radioactive paradise when I realized when I got there. So not a single journalist would interview me. I was completely taboo. And I did a Jeff Rense program and talked about it from Hawaii, and I had a Geiger counter, and I had measured the radiation, and I'd been driving through the bombing and gunnery range that day. They had the red flags up, so they were live firing. And so then I taped the measurements I was making all evening, 15 miles away. And Dick Allgaier, who had heard me on Jeff Rense, said, if you ever come to Hawaii and you have a story, call me and I'll put it on my ABC station. So I called him and I said, hey, Dick, I've got this videotape I just made, and the radiation levels, the uranium levels are horrendous here from Pohakaloa. He said, come right to Oahu and I will put you on TV. It was a 2.5-minute interview, and it caused a global radiation monitoring uproar. The police chief of New York City tried to get a law passed that no citizens could own any kind of air monitoring equipment or Geiger counters. That didn't work. And all it did was get all the islanders up in arms, and that's a Pacific Rim country. It's not like America. They have a very, very, very dense social network, so the information just went like wildfire. And so I was trying to get a depleted uranium bill in the legislature, and I was going in and out of legislators' offices, and they always wanted my information and my report, but they didn't want to do anything with it. And I couldn't even get the bill introduced. But what the military did, they were so terrified of me, they took General Lee out of retirement and they put him like a hound dog on me to be in all the hearings and the meetings and the legislature and everything to shut me up. He got 23 depleted uranium bills in one session to block mine. Well, that's the best publicity he ever could have given me. And then I finally said, well, none of the newspapers will interview me, so I'll go to the free weeklies. Well, one of them did a cover story on Pohakaloa and depleted uranium there, and they put a skeleton on the background was the battlefield, and he was in an aloha shirt, the skeleton on a battlefield with tanks shooting depleted uranium. Oh my God, Alfred, it started an epidemic of free weekly newspapers doing rivalry cover stories on depleted uranium. It was a huge competition on all the islands. So that's what I mean about how powerful it can be if you just try to do something. You never know what it'll turn into.
Right.
Well, they are still complaining, they are still investigating, and any time a senator from Hawaii comes back to Hawaii to do any public events, they have to put chain link fences around the event to keep all of the citizens waving Geiger counters at the senators complaining about the radioactive paradise.
Right,
so,
right.
The senators don't even like to do public events now, and everybody's got Geiger counters and they know how to use them.
Right, and so it's bringing this focus. Well, we've come to the end of the time for this segment. However, what sort of insights would you like to leave our viewers with for this segment, which is bringing very particular news? I mean, we're getting the news of the false flag that was planned for World War III in the same way that if we've gotten news of Pearl Harbor before, if we've gotten news of the Gulf of Tonkin quote false flag before, if we've gotten news of 9/11 as the false flag for the war on terror before, we've now gotten this. So what would you like to leave us with?
Well, I think what I'd like to leave us with is that this is a huge ray of hope for humanity. It's a tremendous opportunity that Russia has provided for us. And there's been a lot of Soviet-era rhetoric and demonizing Russians and Soviets and terrible things said about Putin. I think it's all very unfair. It's coming from very vested interests that are interested in destroying our lives, the environment, genociding large numbers of people all over the world. And here is a country, a government, a military, a political leader, the Duma, which is their parliament or Congress, willing to support this transition to a peaceful economy that brings wealth and peace and happiness to all people. And so that's what we need to support. And there are many ways to offer that support, to provide it. We have no choice. There will be nothing left if we don't do it. And it's lots and lots of fun getting to know people and passing information around and empowering people and being empowered. And people can start writing articles if they don't want to post the ones that are already written. They can start writing about what's happening locally to them, and start by putting it up on the Indie Media sites. Indie Media is all over the world. It's free. It's all run by volunteers, and it's a great way to get information out there. I was in the Himalayan post. They were putting my stuff in Slovenia, in the Chiapas Indians in Mexico, in Yucatan, were one of my biggest fans. It's so much fun. It's coming back to being a human being. It's having emotions and having contacts, interacting with people, and learning about other cultures and music and thoughts and values and food, all kinds of things. That's what life is really about. It's not sitting in front of a boob tube watching nonsense. It's not believing everything in the education system. It's going out and interacting with other people and seeing for yourself what's really happening. The best things in life are free. It's called free falling through life. And when you get into that mode and you're in your spiritual energy, you're operating out of that spiritual energy, and you're doing it for the right reason, and you're morally correct, then the right kinds of people begin to come and help you. And that's actually what we're watching happening to Putin. The right people, the right countries, the right leadership, the right governments are coming to join the hope and the ray of sunshine and the promise of a better future for all of humanity. That's what Putin is doing.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much for reporting on this important breaking news. And we look forward to you joining us again, Leuren, with these vital and breakthrough stories. Thank you.
Well, Alfred, it's your fault. You're the one who started me on this. So you're my Siamese twin, whether you want to be or not. Everywhere I go, you go with me, and everywhere you go, I go with you. So it's certainly been a very exciting adventure. We've both certainly grown from it in terms of careers and many, many ways, developing self-confidence and not being afraid to put out ideas that aren't at first accepted by people. But if it's correct, sooner or later people begin to understand and to contribute. So thank you very much for all that you've helped me with and supported me, and the information we've been able to share with each other. And I'm just so happy that I was able to meet you and do things with you. It's a collaboration we didn't plan. It just happened for the right reasons.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much.
And it's really fun watching the New World Order getting smashed out of existence. So that's been a fun thing to share with you, too.
That's for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.